Hi guys, welcome back to the Home and Homestead. I'm Rebecca, and today you'll be joining me in the kitchen while we do some pressure canning. We'll be making some homemade enchilada sauce with some fresh tomatoes. We'll also be using some Anaheim chili peppers to give it a little spice. I wanted to do both fresh and frozen tomato food preservation projects, so you can check out some other videos I have on those topics. But for today, let's work on making some homemade enchilada sauce. Alright, so to create our enchilada sauce, first what we need to do is prepare our Anaheim chilies. So I have a container here of some dried Anaheim chili peppers. They have a really beautiful red color to them. And what we're going to do is place them on a hot skillet. There's no oil or anything on here, and we're just going to place them on this pan once it heats up for about 10 to 20 seconds per side. And what that's going to do is puff up these dried peppers and help release some of the oils and more or less wake them up a little bit. And then we can prepare them further for adding to our sauce. So my inspiration for today's enchilada sauce is from the all-new Ball Book of Canning and Preserving, and it's on page 294. So I'm going to be doing 5 times that recipe, so I'll need 12 per batch of Anaheim chili peppers. So we'll need 60. So we'll place them onto this pan as it's heating up. And once the pan gets nice and hot, each step of this will go much quicker. So I have 10 peppers on here. So I've already prepared my tomatoes and onions for this recipe. So since we're doing 5 times that recipe, we'll need 30 cups of tomatoes, which ended up being about 7.5 quarts of prepared tomato sauce. You could also use diced canned tomatoes for this. For preparing your tomatoes, you can do that a number of different ways. You can core and blanch your tomatoes and then peel them and then send it through a food mill, such as a hand food mill or a Sauce Master food mill, to remove the seeds. Or you can just quarter them and put them through a KitchenAid stand mixer food mill attachment that removes the seeds and the peels at once. I like to use that method because then I save the peels and the pulp and the seeds that are removed, and I dehydrate them to make a tomato powder, which is a really nice tomato paste substitute. You can check out my video on how I do that process for making my tomato powder for my tomato paste substitute. And I also did 25 cups of onions, which ended up being 6.25 quarts of coarsely chopped onions, or about 16 medium-sized onions. Alright, so the pan is heating up now. I can hear it sizzling a little bit, and the peppers are starting to puff up just a little bit, just because the pan is still kind of heating. You'll hear kind of a little crackling noise as the peppers expand. You just want them to heat up about 10 to 20 seconds per side. You don't want to burn them because then the peppers will give off a bitter taste. Then I'll just transfer them to a bowl. Let's get another batch here. So I'm using Anaheim chili peppers, which have kind of a mild and sweet flavor to them. If you wanted something with a little more spice, you could use the guajillo peppers. And you can also check out a video I have on roasted tomato and guajillo salsa that I made. And then that salsa is water bath canned. This enchilada sauce today will be pressure canned. See, this pepper kind of puffed up with air and inflated that dried out pepper. You can see some of these other ones are starting to as well. So I'm going to continue preparing these peppers. So far we have 20, we need 60. All right, here we have our 60 Anaheim chili peppers. So let's move on to the next step. Okay, so we have our 60 Anaheim chili peppers. So now what we're going to do is take a kitchen shears and remove the stems and the seeds from these peppers. So you just cut the stem off, just open it up and tap out the seeds. What I'm going to do is just dump these out onto here, and I can put the prepared pepper back into the bowl. So let's remove the seeds, membranes, and stems from these chili peppers. While we prepare these peppers, I have my electric kettles warming up some water because we will need some boiling water. to rehydrate these peppers once they're ready for that step. Here we have our Anaheim peppers, and the stems and most of the seeds have been removed. So now I'll just put them on here. And now we'll cut them into smaller pieces. I like to use the kitchen shears. You could also just tear the peppers apart. And now that our peppers are all cut into a smaller size, we can add some boiling water. So I have my kettles here all ready to go. It's about 3 to 4 quarts of boiling water here. And I have a 16-quart stainless steel bowl, which works really well for large batches like this. We just want to completely submerge the peppers, and this is going to rehydrate them and soften them. And when we're finished, we're going to reserve 5 cups of this soaking liquid for our recipe. Since we're doing a 5 times the recipe, you reserve 1 cup per batch, so we need to save 5 cups. So now we'll let these peppers sit in this boiling water and rehydrate and soften for about a half hour, or until they're nice and soft. So while the Anaheim chili peppers are soaking in the liquid and softening, we're going to prepare some of the other ingredients for our enchilada sauce. So I have my 18-quart Nesco roaster. Since I'm doing 5 times the recipe, I needed a nice large vessel. You could also use a really large stock pot. So I'm going to turn this up to about 300 degrees, and we're going to saute some garlic and onions, just to give a little flavor to both of those ingredients. So I have a 1/4 cup of pre-minced garlic. If you're going to use whole garlic, it would be about 20 cloves of garlic that you would then have to mince. And we're just going to let that heat through a little bit, just so that the garlic becomes a little fragrant. And as I said earlier, I already prepared my tomatoes and onions for this recipe. So I have 25 cups of coarsely chopped onions. Now I'm going to add these to here. I'm going to turn this up to about 325. Just mix these in here. And as these onions start to cook a little bit, they'll release some of their liquid, and it'll help prevent from sticking. I'm just kind of stirring the garlic throughout so it's not sitting on the bottom of the pan. Are. So let me put the cover on, and that'll help the onions steam a little bit and get going on their cooking. We'll come back in a few minutes. Alright, now while the onions are cooking away, our Anaheim peppers have finished soaking and they're nice and soft. So what I want to do is process them in my food processor just so they're a nice smooth puree. So I'll use this hand strainer. And we'll get all the peppers into the food processor. All right, we'll get the lid on. And we'll puree this. Okay, let's see how it looks. Nice and smooth. Now, if you recall earlier, we were reserving the soaking liquid. So I'm going to put 5 cups of this liquid eventually into this. For now, I'll just do 1 cup. You can always add the rest later. There we are. Now there's just a little more liquid to that puree. Now let's head back to the onions and add some more ingredients to make our enchilada sauce. Okay, let's remove the lid here. And the onions have been cooking down. They've softened and they're nice and tender. And they're just starting to caramelize. So now we can start adding in the other ingredients. So here I have my prepared tomato sauce. So we'll add that in. And I should mention that these onions, this large of a quantity, took about an hour to get to this point. So every 15 minutes or so I would come in and stir it. I kept it cooking at about 325. Now we'll add in our Anaheim chili pepper puree that we just created with the food processor. And I have already added 1 cup of the reserved pepper soaking liquid just to make this puree a little bit easier to work with. So we'll add that in. Now the recipe calls for 1 cup of the soaking liquid to add in to create your enchilada sauce. But our tomatoes have quite a bit of liquid to them. And onions give off quite a bit of liquid as well. So I prefer starting with about 1 cup or whatever is necessary to make the pepper puree a nice consistency, and then see if we need to add the rest of the reserve liquid later. Now let's add some of the seasonings and spices. So we're going to put in 1 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and this is optional. If you don't want a little more sweetness to your enchilada sauce, you can leave this out. Let me mix that in here. Next we'll add 10 tablespoons of a chili powder, which ends up being 1/2 cup plus 1/8 cup. And we'll mix that in. Next we'll need 10 teaspoons of cumin, which is 1/4 cup plus 2 teaspoons. Then we'll add 6 teaspoons of red pepper, either flakes or ground, which ends up being about 2 tablespoons. And the last ingredient that we will add, if we do not need to add any more of that reserve liquid, is the canning salt. But I like to cook it down for a while, see how the flavors come out, and add the salt later to taste. 5 times the recipe would be about 1/4 cup of canning salt. But we'll see. Now what we're going to do is use an immersion blender and puree this whole mixture so it's a nice smooth sauce. You could also do this in batches in a blender or food processor. I just like to do the chili peppers in the food processor to get a really nice smooth puree or paste from that. And now I can just basically chop down these onions that have softened for us. So let's use our immersion blender and get this nice and smooth. There we go. Now we have a nice smooth sauce. So now I'm going to turn the temperature to 325 degrees. So now we're going to let the enchilada sauce cook, and this may take a good 1.5 to 2 hours. It's going to cook down and thicken up and darken a little bit as the time goes. So we'll apply the cover and let this cook, and I will come back and stir this every 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, so we have our enchilada sauce. It has been cooking down for about an hour and a half. So now let's give it a taste and see how much salt we need to add. So the original recipe called for 2 teaspoons of salt per batch, and we did it 5 times batch, so that would put it at about 10 teaspoons. 12 teaspoons is a 1/4 cup. I like the sweetness and the spiciness of the sauce already. So let's just start with 3 teaspoons. We'll mix that in. The flavors have concentrated a bit as it cooks down. Let's give this a taste. It's pretty good. Let me give it one more taste. I'm going to add 2 more teaspoons. That way we'll be at about half of the recommended salt. And that's a canning salt. I don't want it to be too salty because I'll be using this with a variety of different recipes. I can always add salt with the recipe that I'm doing. But it definitely needed a little something. So it's a little sweet and spicy and a slightly smoky flavor. This should be really delicious on some enchiladas. So now I have some regular mouth pint jars. I have 16 here. I have my pressure canner warming up. It can hold 18 regular mouth pint jars, but I wanted to start with 16 and maybe do some different size jars from there. So let's get these jars filled up. We will be filling to a 1-inch headspace. So that's to the bottom of the threads. If you don't feel comfortable eyeballing it, you can certainly use a headspace measuring tool. Let's keep filling these jars. Next, I'll take my headspace measuring tool, and on the other end is a bubble removal tool, and I'll just slide it through the sides of the jar as well as throughout the middle. That just helps to remove some of the air bubbles that may have formed while you were filling your jars. And now you can go through with a spoon and just see if any of the jars are a little bit too high or a little too low. You can add a little more sauce as needed and take out as some if needed to get that 1-inch headspace. Now we'll take a paper towel that I just moistened with some water, and I'll wipe off the rim as well as the side threads. You want to wipe off any food particles that may have fallen onto your jar. And on the rim there, that'll help to ensure a nice seal. And I like to wipe down the side threads as well because that just helps to keep your ring a little bit cleaner. Because you can reuse the rings for other canning projects. Now we'll just put the lid, followed by the ring, onto the jar. And we'll just tighten them finger tight. Alright, let's head over to the pressure canner and get these jars into the canner for processing. Alright, so we're over at the pressure canner and I have it heating up and getting ready for us. I have it on a little side burner, and that seems to work really well for my canning projects. So I have the recommended amount of water inside of my pressure canner, followed by the jar rack on the bottom, which is just a little tray that the jars sit on just so that they're not sitting directly on the bottom of your canner. Then you're going to place them in here. I have 16, so I'm going to do 8 on each level. If you have a pressure canner and you're doing pints and things like that, you can do 2 layers of jars. There we go. Now I'll put the other jar tray on top of that layer, and I'll add my other 8 jars. There we go. Now I'll put the lid on here. You just start slightly off center, depress it, and then slide so that the handles are in line with one another. So now what we're going to do is watch for steam to come out of this little stem on a steady stream for 10 minutes. Once it starts coming out of here on a steady stream, I'll set a timer, and after 10 minutes, then we can put the weight on here. This is a weight style pressure canner. There's also a dial style pressure canner, which has a little dial with numbers on top. If you're using the weight style, this is a 10 psi as a base pressure and 11 psi for a gauge style. And what I mean by that is, based on your altitude on the far left column, you may need to increase the weight gauge in the middle column, or make sure the dial gauge is at the setting that you see on the far right column. So for the dial style pressure canner, you may need to increase or decrease the temperature on your burner in order to maintain the proper PSI during processing. So I'll let this canner come up to pressure, watch for the steam to come out here, and after the 10 minutes has passed, then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so the steam has been steadily going out of the stem. I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera, but the little water droplets are coming down, showing that the steam is coming out. And I have the timer set for 10 minutes. So now we can add our designated weight onto the stem. So now the pressure canner has heated up. We've assigned the PSI that we want for this particular project. And now we'll wait for the pressure canner to come to that defined pressure. And once that happens, this little red tab here will pop up. And once it pops up, then you start your processing time. And the processing time for enchilada sauce is 50 minutes. So we'll just watch for this little red tab to pop up, showing us that it's at the proper PSI, and we'll let the canner process these jars. And there you go. The little red tab has raised, so we know that it's at the proper PSI. So I'll set my timer for 50 minutes. And then we'll come back for the next step. Alright, so the processing time has finished, so now I'm just going to shut off the burner here to the pressure canner, and we'll let the pressure slowly release, and eventually this little red tab will fall flat to this handle, and then we'll know that the pressure has been safely released and we can remove the weight gauge and open our canner. So we'll just let this sit and slowly cool and release its pressure. Alright, so as you can see, the little red tab has fallen flush with the handle, so we know that the pressure has been released. So now I can safely remove this weighted gauge. There's no steam or anything spurting out from there. So remove that. And I'll just turn the handle on the lid and lift it away from me so I don't get steam in my face. So now we'll just let these jars sit in here for about 5 minutes, and then I'll transfer them over to the cooling and sealing area. Now this was a pretty large batch of enchilada sauce, so I have another batch of jars to go in here to be processed. So once I remove these jars, I'll add a little more water if necessary, heat this back up, and process the second batch. Then once everything is processed, we'll have a look at our final product of our homemade enchilada sauce. Alright guys, we did it! We canned about 23 pints worth of enchilada sauce. So we did 5 times the recipe, and it's a sweet and a little bit spicy sauce. It's nice and smooth, and it kept a nice red coloring to it. So I'm looking forward to using this for recipes, making enchiladas, and other Mexican or Spanish style recipes as well. So we used some fresh tomatoes for this food preservation project and pressure canned the enchilada sauce. If you'd like more inspiration on other tomato food preservation recipes or ideas, you can check out my food preservation playlist, as well as a number of tomato-specific recipes. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so yet, I'd really appreciate you subscribing. If you enjoyed this or any other videos, please give them a thumbs up. I hope you're having a fantastic day. See you next time. Take care.